Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're jumping right into a huge development in one of the Middle East's longest-running conflicts, the possible end of the fight between Turkey and the Kurdistan Workers Party, also known as the PKK.
So let's kick things off with this really powerful statement from Turkey's President Recep Tayyip Erdoğan. He called this moment an irreversible turning point. But what on earth could prompt such a historic thing to say?
You know, to really feel the weight of that quote, we have to start with this number, 50,000. That's the estimated number of people who've lost their lives in this decades-long conflict. It's just a staggering human cost, and it really frames everything we're about to talk about.
So, what is this turning point really? Well, it all comes down to a monumental decision made by the Kurdistan Workers Party, or, as you probably know them, the PKK.
Get this, after decades of armed struggle, the group announced it would pull all of its fighters out of Turkey, moving them to bases up in northern Iraq. And not only that, they said they're now going to pursue their goals through democratic politics, not violence. They even held a symbolic ceremony to destroy weapons, just to mark the shift. I mean, this is a huge, huge deal.
Now, what's really fascinating here is the why. After all this time, after so much fighting, why is this happening now? What's pushing both sides to the peace table?
And look, this wasn't some decision that just came out of the blue. Not at all. As you can see from this timeline, it was this incredible cascade of events. It really kicked off in February when the PKK's imprisoned leader, Abdullah Öcalan, called for disarmament. By March, the group declared a ceasefire. And then by May, they announced their full dissolution inside Turkey. That is an insane amount of progress in just a few months.
And this right here, this really shows you the fundamental shift that's been happening over time. The PKK's core goal has totally changed. What started out as a fight for a completely independent Kurdish state has now morphed into a call for greater cultural rights, some limited autonomy, and, crucially, the chance to fully participate in Turkish politics. So, what's behind that big change? Well, it seems to be a mix of things. For one, after decades of violence, the appetite for more fighting, it's just not there anymore. On top of that, their iconic leader, Öcalan, has been in prison since 1999. Their commanders over in Iraq are constantly under attack, and their political allies inside Turkey have been facing relentless crackdowns. It's really a strategic pivot, born out of just plain exhaustion and constant pressure.
Okay, so we've talked about the what's and the whys. Now let's get into the how. How can this incredibly fragile peace actually stick? Because honestly, this is the make or break part of the whole deal.
All right, so here's the thing. There is a huge legal roadblock standing right in the way. The PKK is officially labeled a banned terrorist organization, not just in Turkey, but by a lot of its allies too. You can't just, snap your fingers and have its members rejoin society.
So what this really means is that for peace to actually hold, Turkey has to build a kind of legal bridge, a way for these fighters to cross from a life of insurgency into civilian life. That means creating a real path for amnesty, setting clear rules for how they can participate in politics, and of course putting new laws in place that protect Kurdish cultural and language rights.
And the risk of not getting this right? It's immense. As the source material says, without these clear laws, you could end up with disarmed fighters just stranded in the mountains of Iraq, completely in limbo. And their supporters back in Turkey, they would feel totally betrayed. The trust in the whole process could just shatter.
Okay, let's zoom out for a second, because what happens here doesn't just stay in Turkey. Oh no. The outcome of this has massive ripple effects that could be felt across the entire Middle East.
You see, this is not just a Turkish issue. The Kurdish question, as it's often called, is a regional one. You've got significant Kurdish populations in neighboring Iraq, Syria, and Iran, and you can bet they are all watching very, very closely to see how this all plays out. And this really presents two starkly different paths for the region. I mean, it's a real fork in the road. If peace works out in Turkey, it could become a blueprint, a template for how other countries can solve their own Kurdish issues through dialogue. But if it fails, well, it could not only restart the conflict in Turkey, but also empower hardliners everywhere who believe that force is the only answer.
So where does all this leave us? What's the bottom line? What are the actual concrete steps that are needed to make this peace last for the long haul? Well, the Turkish government has taken what seems to be a pretty positive first step. They've put together this special 51-member commission, and it's a cross-party group, which is a big deal. The idea is for them to figure out how to navigate all these complex issues and map out a path forward.
But for the PKK's big moves to be really matched, The argument is that Turkey has to put its own irreversible measures on the table. That means things like easing military restrictions in the Kurdish regions, actually passing those new laws we talked about for amnesty and political life. And then there's the big one, the one that's a huge point of contention, the potential release of the PKK's imprisoned leader, Abdullah Öcalan.
And all of this brings us to the final, critical, million-dollar question that's hanging over this whole process. Is this really the beginning of a new chapter for Turkey and its Kurds people, one built on peace and democracy? Or will the deep-seated mistrust and the loud voices of hardliners on both sides win out in the end? Honestly, only time is going to tell.